meeting to order. If you'd please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I'd like to begin this evening with a moment of silence. It is with deep regret that I feel inclined to share that one of our Saline Police Department Reserve officers, whose professional career was as a security guard at St. Joe Hospital, passed away recently. Very nice gentleman by the name of Paul Adams, and we appreciate and respect his service to the community, to the police department specifically, and I would ask that you keep his family and his friends and all of his loved ones in your thoughts and prayers. Please join me in a moment of silence. Thank you very much. Members present this evening are myself, Mayor Morrow, Council Members Gearboss, CO, Rhodes, McClellan, Tahar, and Dillon. From City staff, we have City Manager Campbell, Clerk Royal, Treasurer Bennett, City Superintendent Engineer Rubel, Wastewater Treatment Superintendent Skull, DPW Director Fordyce is here, as well as Police Chief Rennick and Parks and Rec Director Scruggs. For those of the rest of you who are in the audience this evening, excuse me, if you'd please sign in the back to my left, we would appreciate that. At this time, the chair would entertain a motion to approve the agenda as amended. We are going to be striking item 16-27. This is Lexipol Police and Risk Management Resources, and I'll be briefly discussing that under the discussion portion of our agenda. And then I was also notified that one of our guests who is presenting on agenda item 16-32 has some significant travel in front of him, and the suggestion was made to maybe bump that item up to the first action item under new business. But of course, the chair will indulge the group. So if someone would like to make a motion to amend, striking both new business item 16-27 and moving item 16-32, I would appreciate that.
So moved as stated.
Thank you, Councilmember Gearbaugh. Is there a second? Was that a second by Councilmember Seal? Thank you, sir. I also want to note, and I prepared this earlier today with the assistance of Clerk Royal and Deputy Clerk Bloom, I do have an amendment that I will be offering. It was provided at your seat earlier this evening, and that's in reference to the cemetery rule and regulations change. That's item 15-195, and it relates to recommendation 1 on the memo that was provided by the Clerk's Department. So just want to make note of that. It's been properly moved by Councilmember CO, seconded by moved by Councilmember Gearboss, seconded by Councilmember CO to approve the agenda as amended. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it. The motion carries unanimously. There are no absences this evening, so we will dispense with that. We move on to presentations. We have two. The first is an introduction of a new employee with the Saline Police Department, specifically with police dispatch, and I would invite Chief Rennick to the podium at this time.
Well, thank you. With this hire, it completes our dispatch, which is absolutely marvelous because it's only taken 3.5 years to get this done. Katrina Wallace, if you'd step forward, please. She graduated from Pinckney High School and is currently attending Washtenaw Community College for a degree in business administration. She previously completed her EMT training at HVA. She worked in a medical office for several years, 2 years at St. Joe's as a hospital patient care, and she tells me she's very excited about being a dispatcher for Saline. Katrina?
Welcome.
Congratulations.
I told her since she had a long agenda, she had to limit it to 30 minutes. Would that be okay?
I think that will be fine.
I would just like to say thank you for the opportunity, and this is a new career change for me, and so far I'm loving it. So thank you very much for giving me this opportunity.
Thank you for taking time. You worked the day shift today, did you not?
I did today.
So we appreciate you you taking time out of your schedule to join us at 7:30. Welcome aboard. I've heard a lot of good things and look forward to working with you. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Chief, anything else? Good. Thank you, sir. Our second presentation is the 2015 Planning Commission report, and that will be done by City Superintendent Engineer Rubel. Do you have a PowerPoint that's working this evening?
Yep,
Excellent, okay.
new bulb upstairs here. Thank you, Mayor. Every year, the Planning Commission puts together this annual report of their activities, sort of broad brush of activities and significant items that occurred during the year with our Planning Commission. Starting with the 2015 membership, our chairman then, or during 2015, was Jack Seal, who now presides on City Council. Bill Beardsley was the vice chairman. Other members on the committee were Mayor Morrow, Scott Fosdick, Dean Gearbaugh, Cheryl Heff, Walt Byers, and Steve Dybo, who was an appointee, I believe in November, took a position that was vacant. Catherine rep on the Planning Commission, as a voting member, is Catherine Skull, and then myself and Connie DeHaan serve as the staff liaisons for the commission. Here's a photo of what was the outgoing Planning Commission staff for 2015. I happen to get in this picture also our planner, who's with us tonight, Doug Lewan, for the Parks Master Plan presentation, and myself and Connie DeHaan, who is also seated at the desk. Should thank Bob Conradi for that photo. He was nice enough to take it that night. The FY16 budget that we're currently in until June 30th is shown in one column. The FY17 proposed budget, which you'll see during the work sessions on this, is shown on the last column. We did amend the FY16 budget because several things came up. One being the master plan, we had to add that cost in. So that increased that FY16 budget. FY17, we get back to a little more of a normal budget with anticipated growth and site plan expenses, as well as ordinance expenses. I will say some of the budget in FY16 was amended upward because we had a number of ordinances that had to be drafted, and some were via the planner and from direction and reviews by the code task force. One of our major preliminary final site plans was Cypress Ridge, a new housing development on the former site of Houghton School, 27 single lot family development by Mr. Danny Very of Livonia Builders. Currently they have pulled 9 building permits, and some are in the rough framing stage even. We approved the final site plans for phase 2 of Huntington Woods, which currently basically is on hold. We have yet to work on the condominium development agreement and some other follow-up items from the site plan approval, including permits. A very large start here in Saline was the Liebherr Aerospace World Headquarters. As you can see on the campus plan, there would be 4 major large buildings. Currently, phase 1 comprises 1/3 of building A, which is in the, I would say, upper right quadrant there. The existing Liebherr facility, of course, is on the far right. But you can see the campus plan was elaborately outranged, nice geometric pattern, with the internal private boulevard with a large circle, sort of like a traffic circle. And then it connects both to Woodland Drive and to Maple Road, or will. Probably a 15 or 20-year project altogether. Current facility, the 1/3, is 43,500 square feet. They were able to achieve quite a bit of work this fall. They're shooting for an April grand opening. Some site plan amendments at the Planning Commission were some changes and improvements to the Salt Springs Brewery site plan. The office building that was formerly just a model and an office for housing development was approved to be converted into an office business, still not occupied for that purpose. And then finally, at 1200 Woodland Drive, someone purchased that facility and is now converting it to a sports facility for youth training, soccer, volleyball, and other indoor sports. We did work on the Saline master plan. Our facilitator, of course, is our consultant planner, Doug Luan, who prepared and conducted the open house in October 2015. It was well attended, as you can see. In fact, more of the notable contributors to the community are shown on some of these pictures. You can see we have newly elected council person Heidi McClellan's on there. Jim Peters happens to be in this photo, as well as Mary Laronis, who's in the audience here, and then of course the mayor's up front too. So usually you get those people that are very committed to improving the community at our open houses and master planning sessions. One concept plan review conducted for 207 Monroe Street. This photo happens to be a session that Damien Farrell conducted with the City Council, and it shows 24 units of a condominium project to be constructed within 3 two-story buildings on the former Karpinski property located north of People's Park on Monroe Street. And so that next step in that project would be a zoning application, hearing at the Planning Commission, and then eventually come to the City Council for approval. We had a number of zoning amendments for district changes besides other zoning amendments. We had rezoning of the former Houghton School property, of course, so the Cypress Ridge project could be developed at the lot sizes on their site plan. And we rezoned one property here on North Harris Street from I-2 to a more conforming zone of its use, and that is of a single-family residence, and that's turned out quite well. Second story added, looks very nice. Code amendment reviews that were recommended by the task force committee after their review. The sign ordinances, which is still pending outcomes of litigation at the national level, I believe, in the courts, and our city attorney is keeping on top of that and will let us know as soon as he can what further changes need to be made before it comes back to Planning Commission, City Council. Article 13 parking ordinance. The hearing was conducted at the Planning Commission last week, and it will be presented to the City Council for their approval on February 29th. Mr. Luan is currently working on a conversion of our CUP ordinance into a PUD ordinance, which will benefit a number of properties in town. It'll give us a better planning tool and a better tool for planners and developers to use, and introduce a lot of flexibility, especially in a time of need when we are basically faced with a lot of marginal land in the city, marginal lots, which offer more challenges for developments. We currently are under discussion of rezoning 3 lots in the Sauk Trail Business Park. If that comes to fruition, we may rezone those 3 lots fronting on US 12 from I-2 to SPA 1, and also introduce some more business-oriented uses that actually would be more suited on US 12 than industrial uses. We provided our annual sign exemption for the Celtic Festival to Mr. Jim Peters, so the large Millie signs could be erected at 2 locations along US 12. There were some administrative amendments. Those are small changes in the site plans that city staff was allowed to review and give approvals for. So we did that on these 5 during the year. We added a small porch at 101 South Harris Street to a site plan that was approved earlier that year. We approved the relocation of the downtown diner smoker from Emmediato across the street to the Quantum Signal property, where it's enclosed in a fenced-in area. Staff reviewed and approved the Outhouse Scout project at the Historic Depot Museum, another element added to the historicity of that site. We approved the small increase in area of the proposed entrance at the Robinson Baumiller Funeral Home. The the architect had come up with some necessary changes, and they got a little bit of bonus area for their entrance, their new entrance and their first floor remodeling uses. Then we also approved a little reconstruction of a parking and driveway or a walkway improvements at 106 West Michigan Avenue, so a new user could move in, and also provided more ADA accessibility. Give credit here to some maintenance projects that were initiated by property owners. The major one being, of course, 232 Monroe Street. Phase 1 remediation completed by Johnson Controls this year. They also responded favorably to our request to move the fence back from the right-of-way in Monroe Street and put it back on the property, because during construction it was moved out because there was supposed to be some sidewalk construction there. And of course the project failed, and therefore the sidewalk wasn't built. But now we have the opportunity, if we want to extend sidewalk, that the fence would not have to be moved. Evangelical Homes provided some extensive resurfacing at their entrance off Russell, and then some of their parking areas. Turned out very well. And then I happened to be out one day and caught a photograph of the Saline Library project, where they were installing the solar panels on the roof. Our goals and objectives remain pretty much the same as last year. It has initiated update of the master plan, recreation plan, but this would be, we have to do the final stages of that. We have to do the final reviews. Doug has formed a committee of sorts to help prep things for our meetings that are coming up on February 29th. And another initiative we have is to promote green aspects for new developments. We do that through our site plan reviews, of course. And then overall, we consider planning improvements based on their production of healthy living, sidewalks, pathways, and bikeways, on-site plans, of course. And then in our back of our mind, we're trying to be involved with regional development planning. The 2016 membership after our election, in our first meeting in January, we see Vice Chair Bill Birdsley has moved up to chairperson. Our past treasurer, Cheryl Heft, has moved up to vice chair. The body of membership then they're basically the same, except for the addition of Terry Seibel-Koenig, former council person, who, when she stepped down from the city council, volunteered sort of for the planning commission membership. So I think that about takes care of the presentation of the annual report.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Rubel. That was very thorough. Are there any questions or comments for our city superintendent engineer? Mayor Pro Tem Rhodes.
Yeah, I thought it might be worthwhile mentioning for those in the audience and those who are going to watch this later on tape that the outhouse project at the Depot Museum is only a replica of an outhouse.
Duly noted. Additional comments, questions from council? Well, again, Mr. Rubel, thank you for the report, the analysis. It's a pleasure to serve on that body. I'm sure Councilmember Gearbaugh feels the same way as one of the liaisons from this group. Very committed, really thorough, and my only regret, although Terry Seibel-Koenig is absolutely a wonderful addition, as many of you know, we regret that Councilmember Seo is no longer a part of that group. We appreciate your years of service and leadership specifically, so thank you very much.
Thank you.
If there's nothing further, thank you, Mr. Rubel.
Units.
This one?
At this time, we come to citizen comments on agenda items. Under the Open Meetings Act, any citizen may come forward at this time and make comment or question on an item that appears on this agenda. Comments will be limited to 3 minutes per person. Anyone who would like to speak is requested but not required to state his or her name and address for the record. Are there any comments on agenda items?
John Heller, 213 Sheffield. Brian, I'm not clear, you struck the Lex poll off the agenda, is that correct?
It
Or-
was added as a discussion item, Mr. Heller, so if you'd still care to comment on that, that would be appropriate.
Okay. I would just like to point out that Mr. Hess, who you hired to evaluate the police department for $5,000, and who made the recommendation to revise and rewrite the policies and procedures at the police department, is, at the time he made his report, was also a employee of Lexipol. And that's the same company that you're now proposing to award a $10,000 no-bid contract to, apparently without investigating whether or not there are other entities that could do that. And to my mind, that smacks of a kickback scheme. And I think that that is a very problematic thing. And I would also point out that the mayor has said that he was interested in having everyone on the council sign an ethics pledge. And I would also say that that kind of scheme appears to be very unethical as well. If you are hiring somebody who then is subsequently employee of the firm that you're now going to award a contract to with no bids involved whatsoever. So I would just like to have that on the record that that does seem to be somewhat of a kickback scheme and an unethical way of doing business. And I would just like that noted. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Heller. There are additional comments on agenda items. Mrs. Hess, please.
Mary Hess, I concur with Mr. Heller's comment on not going out for a contract. The other thing is, as far as I appreciate that there apparently has been some recommendation on the cemetery. Presently, I have a crypt that in, well, let's see, they were about 1960, I bought for $125. And the way it's presently promoted is that I could sell it, shall sell it back to the city, and then, of course, it would be at least from $4,500 in today. So I appreciate you relooking back. The other thing, as far as when you were talking, the citywide fee book, I noticed Mr. Skull has not turned, or other people have not turned theirs in, and I'm wondering if you have looked at a septic cost increase or a water, like for Scrub-A-Home. Since our water rates have went up twice, I think it would be fair to look at, because they don't have the taxes to pay, they come in and use. The third thing was cemetery. I'm going to think of it. Hey, there's a public hearing on parks. So, thank you for your kindness.
Yep, thank you, Mrs. Hess. And thank you for noting that if you do have a comment on the Parks and Rec Master Plan, there will be opportunity for additional public comment on agenda item 16-24. Additional public comments, Mr. Grossman?
Yep. Eric Grossman, 34-year city employee, sliding into 35, so I'm still going. My comments are also on the cemetery changes. When my mother passed away, I had to settle her estate, and part of that were 6 or 5 extra grave sites of my grandparents that weren't being utilized, and so I went through the process and got the names of, as you know, what fractures the longer that goes along. Amy Bloom was very helpful, and I got the necessary documents to sell those parcels. We sold one to an individual that was looking for one site here in town. 2 other ones were sold to the Alber family. They were related because their family plot was right next to my grandfather's, so their 2 sites are now with their family plot. So that leaves 2 sites. I understand you're changing the rules that you cannot sell grave sites to people the way I've done that and the way it's been done in the past. And I would have to sell it back to the city, but I would be selling it back at the price that they were bought in 1958, which is $400. And then the city, I understand, would then sell them for $1,500. And I did some quick math, and the value in today's dollars of the 1958 is about $3,400. So I was selling them really at the price the city was selling for $1,500, which was fine with me. I was just trying to get them out there where people could use them. So the idea of selling them for $400, really, why would I or anyone else want to do that? So I think you're setting up a situation where you're going to have a lot of these grave sites setting. And for instance, the Bixby's have something in the old section. Those were sold for $10. So if Nora Bixby decides to sell one, you're going to say, here, Nora, here's $10 for you and $1,490 to the city of Saline. I don't think you're going to get people wanting to do the sales and really getting what's needed by some people and not needed by others. It's a good way to facilitate people getting the ability to be buried in Saline. So if you could address that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Grossman. Additional public comments on agenda items? No? Okay, very good. Well, we'll move on to the consent agenda then. The following consent agenda will normally be adopted without discussion. However, at the request of any citizen or council member, any item may be removed from the consent agenda for council discussion.
Move to approve as submitted.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Rhodes. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Councilwoman Dillon. Hearing no discussion, all those in favor of approving the consent agenda as submitted signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it, the motion carries unanimously. We move on to public hearing. This is agenda item 16-24. This is Park Commission Master Plan recommendations. Of course, you have the support material in your packet. The first motion will be a motion to open the public hearing at, let's say 7:57 p.m.
So moved.
Thank you, Councilmember Gearbaugh, and was that Councilwoman Tahar who was the second?
Yes.
Thank you, ma'am. It's been properly moved and seconded. All those in favor of opening the public hearing at 7:57 p.m. signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it. The public hearing is now open. Anyone who wishes to speak is welcome to come forward. Mrs. Hess? And again, a limit of 3 minutes per person. Sorry. My
I
apologies.
read that part, okay. I appreciate all the work that's been put into the proposal. The two comments I have at this point is that there is proposed a privacy fence around the porta-johns. Well, sometimes that's a hidden area for somebody to be taken advantage of. I think there's a safety factor there too. Also, I'm trying to figure out how the people that empty the porta-johns are going to get past this fence. Second thing is Mill Pond Park was made by dredging the Saline River. It is made of silt, which is very fine soil. The Corps of Engineers told us, when I was on council, that we should not use that area for high impact because it's definitely going back into the river. So the foundation for a bridge being proposed, about $300,000, across the subdivision on the hill to the river, or to Mill Pond Park, is not a good idea because you have to look at the land, and then there's another $150,000 for making it handicapped for the ramp. But the park was man-made by silt, and it should not have heavy, you have to make sure you build your house on a firm foundation. And the same thing goes for bridges. Those are two of the many comments I have under 3 minutes.
Very
Thank
good.
you.
Thank you, Mrs. Hess. Are there additional public comments on the Parks and Rec Master Plan? How about a motion then to close the public hearing at 7:59 PM?
So moved.
Thank you, Councilmember Gearba. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded again by Councilwoman Tahar. All those in favor of closing the public hearing signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it. The public hearing is now closed. The final motion will be a motion to acknowledge receipt of the January 20th, 2016 memo from Parks Commission Recording Secretary Jody Roberts and to approve and adopt or not to approve the 2016-2020 City of Saline Parks and Recreation Master Plan as submitted.
Move to acknowledge receipt, to approve and adopt.
Thank you, Councilwoman Tahar. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Councilmember Seal. I know that we have Doug Lewan here from Carlisle Wortman, as well as our Parks and Rec Director, Ms. Scruggs. Would either of you care to make a comment at this time?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd just like to give a little summary of the Parks and Rec plan and point out a couple of the key elements of the plan for the council, which I am assuming you've read through, and if you have any comments, we'll try to address those. The first off, for those watching at home and listening and those in the audience, really, when we talk about the purpose of the Recreation Master Plan, it's the plan that the city puts together to articulate a vision for the Parks and Rec, the community, and it's the most recent Parks and Recreation Master Plan was adopted in 2010. So these plans are looked at every 5 years, and a big part of the reasoning for the 5-year Recreation Master Plan amendment is, one, so that the community does have a good vision of where we're going, but two, that we qualify for funding from the state of Michigan. That's really a big part of a Recreation Master Plan. If you don't have a current Recreation Master Plan, you simply can't apply for funding. So there are various parts of the plan. As you see, if you look in the document itself, we have a full community description that gives a pretty detailed demographic analysis of the city. There's an administrative structure which talks about all the people within the city that are involved in the Parks and Rec function and how they relate back to the city council. We did a pretty thorough inventory of all the recreation facilities within the city and outside of the city, actually. So we've looked at city parks, county parks, state parks, and their relationship to the city, as well as all of the facilities that are located, active and passive, within all of those areas. Based on that inventory, we do a public participation analysis and a needs analysis that kind of lays out maybe some of the shortfalls or some of the areas where the city might want to spend some time in. I'd like to spend a few minutes, again, for those who in the public that might be here for this meeting, to talk a little bit about the public review of the plan and how we got here. The draft plan was developed and beginning on December 18th was put out for public review. So the plan was out for public review, and it was placed in various locations around the city for residents to be able to see and look at and make comments to. In addition to the plan being provided for public review, it was posted on the city website. Provided information was provided on mlive.com that the plan was available. And of course, we're having the public hearing this evening in front of the City Council. On January 19th, the Parks Commission recommended adoption of the plan at a public meeting of that body. All this public input is now culminated to really this point, and we hope that the City Council will review and maybe after some discussion, if there is any, make a resolution to adopt the plan. I will point out that I've been talking to Carla and, of course, trying to get this on the council agenda as quick as possible. We note that there are a few typographical errors, and there's a few maps that maybe aren't pointed to the right position, although the data's there. These are things we certainly can correct, and we will correct, and Carla's keeping a kind of detailed scorecard of that. However, the big picture things are some of the things I'm going to talk about in a few minutes, and that's really the inventory of the parks and then the action plan of the parks. So the next big part of the plan really is the goals section. And the Parks Master Plan has one overall goal. And the overall goal for the City of Saline Parks and Recreation Department is to provide a variety of recreational opportunities for people of all ages and abilities that meet the needs and desires of the community. That's the overall goal that's stated in the master plan that we hope that the document addresses. In that goal, there are various objectives that we hopefully stated that will help meet that goal. And those objectives, there are 5 of them. There are park maintenance, park development, a development of a shared use pathway, recreation programming, and administration and communication to the public. So through those 5 objectives, we hope to attain the overall goal of this plan. The goals and objectives section is a very specific part of the plan that's very important. The next major section of the plan is the action plan. So the action plan provides specific improvements for various parks and facilities within the city. So if you've been able to take a look at that, you'll see we get into very specific ideas, as Ms. Hez mentioned about the screening around some of the outhouses. We get some very specific ideas. These were taken from the Parks Commission and also through some of the public input that we received through the visioning session we had, as well as the online community remarks tool, which, by the way, was just taken offline this morning because it was we had that going till January 31st, and since that was over the weekend, that was yesterday, that was taken off this morning. So we've been receiving comments on the online tool for about about 3 months. In addition to the action plan, the very specific action plan, we have some additional implementation strategies that you'll find, and then finally a series of park maps. And the park maps, of course, aren't surveyed maps. They're not intended to be real estate maps or mortgage surveys, but they are intended to give a good overview of the park and where it's located, show some of the existing facilities within each park, and also identify some of the proposed facilities within the parks. So those are the major sections that I've gone over. The main purpose of the plan, the main goal of the plan, the objectives. I wanted to point out the action plan and some of those elements. And if there's any questions, I can try to answer those. And if I can't, Carla's here, and I'm sure she could help me try to answer some of the maybe more specific questions you might have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lewan. Before I open it up for questions, Director Scruggs, do you care to make any additional comment at this time?
Actually, I think Mr. Lewan did a great presentation, kind of going over the whole process. It was a community process. We encourage people to attend meetings and to give their comments, especially using the My Community Remarks online tool. And I think, we've worked with Carlisle and Associates before on our recreation master plans and other city master plans. I think they do a fantastic job. And I'm very pleased and satisfied with the work that we receive from them.
Very good. Thank you both. Well, why don't you both hang tight for just a moment, and we'll open it up for, let's start with questions. Any questions for Mr. Lewan or Director Scruggs? No? No? How about comments? Mr. Gearbaugh, please.
Well, actually, just a question. On the one grant, it looked like the last time we've had a grant was 1999 that had significant funding. Was that when we did the construction of the Bailey Bridge and the...
Actually, that wasn't listed. We received that one in 2000 something. That was the community CMI, Clean Michigan Initiative grant, which was $100 and some odd thousand.
Do we-
But that was not a DNR state grant.
Got it. I couldn't remember where the funding came from. Thank you.
But we could add that, if that would help and just make it look like we.
Yeah, I was just trying to see where else we have funding that could come in that may make us look like we're a community that has invested those kind of grant funding for future grant applications and so forth.
Let's stick on that for just a moment, Councilmember Gearboff, if I may interrupt. Would there be any objection to adding that? Seems perfectly innocuous to me. Okay. We can make that change then without objection. I apologize for interrupting, Councilmember Gearboff.
No, that's fine.
Continue.
And then you answered the question about area of coverage. I was wondering how far out we were going in terms of, because we were looking at private enterprise and so forth, and I saw things that are basically at the edge of Ann Arbor or so forth. So we were looking at like between 5 and 7 miles, or?
For the recreation,
Yeah, and period of, I was just curious as to what area you were looking at in terms of mileage out from town.
I don't know that we had a mileage, but some of those facilities that would be considered regional, we tried to include.
Got it.
What people within the city of Saline might reasonably go get to.
Okay.
After you get, and I don't know what the distance is, but there's a certain distance that people will not travel. And those facilities listed in the plan are those facilities that we believe would be of regional significance.
Got it.
To the residents. of
which is
Saline.
mostly Washtenaw County.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's why I wondered when I saw it. I wasn't exactly sure how that played out in there. The other thing is, I'm really encouraged by the comments about trees and ecosystem development, which I think is a high priority, which I would like to see that continue to be the high priority, because I know a lot of our parks need to be revamped and redone and considered, we lose trees and due to storms and so forth, and that type of thing. So I'm glad to see that that's one of the qualities that you're looking at.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Gearboff. Additional questions or comments? Councilmember Seal, please.
Just a comment. Took the time yesterday to read through the entire document. It's very thorough. I think it's well done. Having participated in a number of other these master plans through Planning Commission, I know how much work and effort goes into it. As a matter of fact, even participated in a public meeting that solicited input on this plan as well. I guess I want to compliment you both. I think it's good work, and all the people who had a share in it. And although there are some objections, there's some things in there that were dear to my heart. The bridge from up there on top of the hill at Stonecliff down to Mill Pond Park was something that I always thought was an important piece that was missing when I lived up there in that end of town, because we were so cut off from everything else. I was pleased to see that it was in here. Even though I think at this point in time it's probably somewhat impractical and there's not any money to do it, the underpass connecting both Mill Pond Park and Curtis Park, I think, is also another important element in this whole thing. So I just wanted to say I appreciate the work that you did, and thank you very much. I think it's a good report.
Thank you, Councilman Seal. Additional comments or questions? Mayor Pro Tem Rhodes.
I would echo some of Councilmember Seal's comments and let everyone know in the audience and that are watching this that the fact that items are included within the master plan does not mean that they will automatically happen. Those that require expenses will have to go through the budgeting process and be approved by the appropriate parties before anything happens. But it's important that they be in here. So again, my thanks for the work you put into it.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Rhodes. Additional comments or questions? Thank you both. Appreciate your time. Back to the motion then. Before I call the vote, are there any additional comments? I would just add one more time, we appreciate everyone who attended the open house or submitted comments online or in person. It's really valued and appreciated. And like Council Members Gearbaugh, CO, and Mayor Pro Tem Rhodes said, this is a really vital document, important for planning in the future. And again, it wouldn't be what it is without the input from the people we represent. So again, thank you to all that contributed thoughts and ideas. At this time, we'll proceed with voting. It's been properly moved by Tahar, seconded by CO, to acknowledge receipt and to approve and adopt. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed say nay. Ayes have it, and the motion carries unanimously. We move on to unfinished business, item 16-16. This is fund balance policy clarification. This will be a motion to acknowledge receipt of the January 6, 2016 memo from City Treasurer Bennett and to approve or not to approve the changes to the City of Saline fund balance policy as submitted.
Move to acknowledge receipt and to approve.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Rhodes. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Councilwoman McClellan. Ms. Bennett, do you care to make any comment this evening? Not unless there's questions. Are there any questions for our city treasurer? We discussed this, was this discussed at our last meeting? And that's why it's coming back for subsequent action, okay? Any comments? Mr. Gearbaugh, please.
Just the only thing with that very last paragraph regarding the considered use, a portion of the 20%, if we go over 20%, and it gives a suggested priority order. I don't have a problem giving examples, I just don't like giving a priority. But that's kind of my concern, because we don't know at that point in time what would be a priority, and if we should have one of these other ones flare up that would be more important, namely paying down our debt or something. I think that would be more of a way to handle it. But I know we've discussed this, so at this point, we'll move forward with it as it is.
Any comments on that point? Ms. Bennett, do you want to touch on that at all?
Well, my only comment would be that at the time that we would be doing that, it would come back to the council, and the suggested priority, I mean, that was just copied out of another one, but council would have to take any approval on anything that we do spend, so that would be up to the council discretion at that time.
Yeah. It's just that in a future council would look at this and potentially say, oh, well, we're supposed to go this route and so forth, and that may not necessarily be what they want to do and be challenged on it by the public. That was only my concern.
I understand Councilmember Gearbaugh's point, and I'm very cognizant of that. At the same time, I think the word suggested, for the most part, resolves any uncertainty or hesitation that exists in my mind. So unless I hear objections from council, I'm comfortable moving forward with the current verbiage. But what does the rest of the group think? Mr. Seal, please.
We just promulgated a policy very similar in nature for another group that I'm working with, and we also put in a suggested priority list at the end. The idea being, again, that it is suggested. And the second thing is so that it didn't appear to outsiders that there wasn't some thought-through plan for the use of those funds should there be excess funds available. We didn't want it to become a money grab. So we said that there are reasonable things for this money to be used for if it's determined that there are excess funds. That was sort of a background thought that we had in promoting a suggested list for the group that I work with, and I could see that it might apply here as well.
Mayor Pro Tem Rhodes?
Yeah, as I recall from our discussions when the fund balance policy was first set up, there was talk about setting priorities, and we in fact changed it to say suggested, because we did not want to require a future council to do something that they might not want to do.
Very good. Okay. Any additional comments or discussion? Ms. Bennett, thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
I think the changes are really common sense, and I think overall they're very positive. Appreciate your work on this. Not unlike the Parks and Rec Master Plan, an important document that reflects our values and priorities on a very important, critical issue. So thank you.
You're welcome. Thank
Okay.
you.
If there's nothing further then, we'll proceed to vote. It's been properly moved by Mayor Pro Tem Rhodes, seconded by Councilwoman McClellan to acknowledge receipt and to approve. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it, the motion carries unanimously. Again, noting that we have a slight revision to the agenda, we jump to new business item 16-32, recommendation of the Michigan Ave Makeover Team, specifically the planters. This will be a motion to acknowledge receipt of the January 27th, 2016 memo from City Manager Campbell and to approve or not to approve the downtown streetscape raised planter veneer as recommended by the design work group.
Move to acknowledge receipt and to approve.
Okay, it's been moved by Mayor Pro Tem Rhodes, seconded by Councilwoman McClellan to acknowledge receipt and to approve. Mr. Campbell, do you want to begin? And then we have the Executive Director of Main Street as well as both Jill and Rebecca. And are you representing the design work group this evening? Excellent, okay. We'll begin with Mr. Campbell, and then if you'd like to make some additional comments, we would welcome that, okay? The floor is yours, City Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As Mayor Morrow just alluded, well, let me back up a little bit. So back in December, council had approved some finishing touches on the streetscape design that will be part of the Michigan Ave reconstruction project kicking off here in a couple months. And one of those items were the 4 new raised planters that will be at the main 4 at Michigan and Ann Arbor Street intersection. And you may recall that the size was determined, but there was still not ready to decide on what the finish, because as they were proposed, it would be like a poured concrete wall, if you will, so a concrete box with some sort of veneer. And so working with, as we have right along, our city staff work group that also is made up of folks from the Main Street design team came together again and discussed what it would be. And so as you can see from the pictures, from the elevation drawings that Paul Reinhold from AECom has provided, the combined group is recommending the brick be used as the veneer on the outside of the raised planters, and it would be essentially the middle brick, as you see the high glossy picture of one of our work group members pointing to that. So it's specific, but it's enough. It's a couple things we wanted to accomplish is, one, that there would be a brick finish that would be reflective of our historic brick buildings downtown, and then also, but enough contrast in color that they would also help with the traffic calming measures that these raised planters are part of. So having said that, the group decided and agreed that this would be the recommendation with the kind of the middle brick of the 3 colors in this design.
We're going to try and get it up on the overhead.
Oh, okay.
Be easier for people to understand.
Sure. So I don't know if anybody, either Paul and or anybody from the design team from Main Street, wanted to make further comment.
Yeah, I apologize, Paul. I failed to acknowledge you earlier. We do have Paul here from AECom, formerly URS. We appreciate your attendance this evening, and of course Rebecca, Riley, and Jill from Saline Main Street. Do you all want to come forward at this time? And Paul, if you have any comments, we would welcome those. And if the folks from Main Street have any thoughts, we would welcome those as well. And we need to zoom in a little bit on that picture.
Move the table.
Yeah, and probably move the table. There you go.
There.
Very good. Paul, do you want to begin?
Sure. We pulled together some different opportunities to present to the design team back in December, some different veneers. Natural Stone presented that, and after discussions and meeting on January 22nd, I believe is what it was, design team decided to go ahead and go with the brick veneer, and what you see in the sketch then is a representation of that. And it would be of a similar color to what we have already selected and have approval for the patterning on the brick sidewalk.
Very good. Before we open up for questions, Riley, Rebecca, Jill, would you like to make any comment? Please, Rebecca. Ladies first.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Some of you may recall that this was the original recommendation of the design team, and it was a recommendation that we revisited after reviewing the stone samples that were sent by Paul. Some of the design team members really were struggling with what to do with those, because some of them didn't seem to make sense, or we just didn't feel that they were the right thing. And at that point, I contacted the Michigan Main Street design specialist, who is sort of like the leader of all the design teams across the state. And I said, you know, Deborah, we've been asked, I didn't give her any guidance. I just said, Deborah, we've been asked to provide suggestions, and what are your comments? And she came back to me and said, you should use red brick on those. And I smiled, because that's originally what we had come up with. And her rationale is the part and the reason why I resubmitted it. It was that The suggested options were too much of a contrast to our existing downtown. They drew too much attention to the planters, and they did not relate to the buildings. She advised us when looking at any streetscape additions, benches, trash cans, anything we bring into the downtown, to really make it blend in as much as possible, because the important feature in our downtown, the bread and butter, the charm, the reason people come here and like it, it's the historic buildings. And that's something that we need to accentuate and not detract from. So that was the reason that we revisited this recommendation, and I was pleased that the task force included it in their recommendation to you. So if you have any more questions, I'm happy to take them.
Very good. Before I open it up for questions, Rebecca, Riley, Jill, do you have any additional comments?
I might say something. real
Please.
fast. Well, with Deborah, she is a part of the State Historic Preservation Office, and she does make recommendations based off their guidelines for streetscape. And while the downtown is not listed on the National Register, it still is good to follow these guidelines with the historic buildings downtown. And considering that the neighborhoods surrounding the downtown are all listed on this, you have a local historic districts and your National Register districts. So it's kind of good to keep that compromise, following those planners in that way, and it kind of has a cohesiveness, I think. And it'll still be a great traffic calming measure with that too, so.
Very good. Thank you. What questions do we have from the dais, either for City Manager Campbell, our guests from AECom, or the folks from Saline Main Street? Mr. Gearbaugh, please.
Just maintenance, in terms of the amount of salt and water and freezing and everything, how will that veneer hold on? Is it similar to what the other stone was? I'm just concerned from the part of it being
It'll
deteriorated.
perform similarly. The brick will effloresce. It'll get some white on it from the salts from the roadway, but that's would be the only type of maintenance that would be required, is to get that cleaned off.
Okay, so there wouldn't be anything where water getting behind it could potentially lift the veneer and damage it?
No, they'll all have a full foundation on the walls themselves.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Gearbaugh. Councilwoman McClellan?
That would be the same situation as what is on the sidewalks as well, right? I mean, if it's going to do it on the planters,
There would be a potential for efflorescence, which is the white salts coming from the brick, yes.
Anything else, Councilwoman? No? Additional questions? No? Very good. Thank you all. Appreciate it very much. Is there anything further on this issue? Any discussion? No, then it's been properly moved by Mayor Pro Tem Rhodes, seconded by Councilwoman McClellan, to acknowledge receipt and to approve. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it, and the motion carries unanimously. We can actually, Chase, we can have the projector turned off now. Thank you for your assistance. Okay, we move on now to new business item 15-211. This is changes to the 2016 City Council meeting dates. This will be a motion to acknowledge the receipt of the January 18th, 2016 memo from Clerk Royal, and to approve or not to approve the changes to the 2016 council meeting dates as submitted.
Move to acknowledge and approve?
Second.
I apologize. Is that Councilwoman Dillon?
Yes.
And Councilwoman, you move to acknowledge and to approve?
Yes.
Thank you, ma'am. And Mr. Gearbaugh, were you the second to that motion?
Correct.
Thank you, sir. Clerk Royal, do you want to comment on your memo of January the 18th?
Well, really, the reason why we were changing the dates is due to some conflicts with billing, to get bills out. So I had not checked with the treasurer when I was working on the council meeting minutes, and with the 4 elections and holidays, it overrode a lot of those bill dates. So that's why these were suggested to be changed.
Very good. Any questions for our city clerk? No questions? Any comments? Then we'll proceed to vote. It's been properly moved by Councilwoman Dillon, seconded by Councilmember Gearbaugh, to acknowledge receipt and to approve. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it, and the motion carries unanimously. We move on to new business item 15-195. This is changes to the cemetery rules and regulations. This will be a motion to acknowledge receipt of the January 7th, 2016 memo from Clerk Royal, and to approve and adopt or not to adopt the changes to the Oakwood Cemetery rules and regulations. Is there a motion?
I would move to acknowledge receipt to approve and adopt with the amendment offered to us this evening.
Okay. So your motion would include the amendment, Mayor Pro Tem?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So is everyone clear then on that verbiage? Okay. Is there a second to that motion?
Second.
Seconded by Councilwoman Dillon. Clerk Royal, do you want to begin, and then I can, of course, comment as the chair of the Oakwood Cemetery Task Force?
Do you want me to go over all of them?
I'll leave it to your discretion. I don't know if you need to go over all of them. I think your memo is pretty clear and succinct, but if you wanted to provide a little bit of background, I think that would be helpful.
Well, and basically what we were doing with the amendment, we will not be, any lots that we have currently will still be sold at the rate that they're being sold for. So, but from tomorrow forward, they would be returned to the city at the price they paid for them and then resold for what they're really going for now. We're also removing the 2% annum, which is interest per year, and we're changing some of the sizes for the flush markers. And we're also including, which is something new, is we will now have Sunday burials, which are at the same cost as Saturday burials. And that's, most of the rest of it is just paperwork.
Let me make a few comments. Thank you, Clerk Royal. Let me make a few comments in my capacity as the chair of the Oakwood Cemetery Task Force, which is where these recommendations originated. As most of you are aware, and as most of the general public is aware, we've been working on these now for several months. These came to a council meeting, I believe, in the late fall, early winter of 2015. They were then sent back to the Oakwood Cemetery Task Force to discuss and vet further. One member of the Oakwood Cemetery Task Force was not present at our last meeting. That is former council member Roth. However, and Clerk Royal, you can correct me if I'm wrong, he has subsequently come into your office and discussed these changes, and he is comfortable with them. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. So the document that is dated January the 7th, 2016 was prepared by the clerk's office. I appreciate that. They are the recommendations that were made by or those recommendations are the consensus of a majority of the Oakwood Cemetery Task Force membership. Now, I was in something of a unique position because while I agree with items 2 through 9, I have a bit of an issue with item 1, which evidently was also the issue addressed during the public comment period by both Mrs. Hess and Mr. Grossman. And so while as chair and mayor I'm obligated to bring forward the recommendations of the task force, I have an issue with one, and that's why I submitted an amendment this evening. I think it's an issue of optics and perception, and obviously for many, many decades that policy has not been in place, and I worry about how it would be received by our citizens and those who own spaces and the rights to bury loved ones at Oakwood Cemetery. Now, needless to say, good people can disagree, and my opinion was not embraced by the membership of the Oakwood Cemetery Task Force. But I think it's appropriate, and of course that's why I offered the amendment, to make an effective start date, assuming this motion passes, of February the 2nd, which means that this policy would apply moving forward and not apply retroactively to individuals who purchased spaces some time ago. So I just want to be clear on that. And for the public's benefit, because copies of the amendments were not provided, I'm going to reread the motion that's on the floor, moved by Mayor Pro Tem Rhodes, seconded by Councilwoman Dillon. So the current motion reads to acknowledge receipt of the January 7th, 2016 memo from Clerk Royal and to approve and adopt the changes to the Oakwood Cemetery rules and to amend number 1 to reflect a start date of February 2nd, 2016, meaning the policy would not be retroactive. And again, Mayor Pro Tem Rhodes, you're comfortable moving that?
That's correct.
And Councilwoman Dillon, you're comfortable seconding that, correct?
Correct.
Okay, very good. Let me, at this time, then open it up for questions to either Clerk Royal or myself. But before I do that, Mr. Campbell, of course, is also on the Oakwood Cemetery Task Force, as well as Councilwoman Tahar. Do you two care to make any comment at this time? Please.
I have one comment.
Yes.
About another matter in the policy, which is on page 13 about foundations being removed and where the cost for that is covered. That was a matter that actually was discussed at some length here at council, and the change that's put forward here is what council concluded was the best way to proceed, just
Good. No, I
for that clarification.
appreciate you sharing that. Okay. Mr. Campbell, do you? No? Okay. Questions for either myself, any member of the task force, or Clerk Royal? Mr. Gearbaugh.
I agree about the retroactivity on this, but the question is, how are we going to handle, and this is only for currently owned city lots that are sold into the future. When you look at the policy and so forth and you start reading through it, it almost looks like you're going to have to do some rewriting of the language in terms of the resale and transfer of grave spaces. Because even in this one, if you look at page 5 of 18, it makes statements that, such as an application for transfer, a certificate of right of burial must state that the reason for transfer and be signed by owner having legal claim to the burial space. The applicant must also indicate on the application that no monetary or other consideration has been exchanged as payment for the transfer. We can't.
Yeah, you're correct. In fact, I just conferred with the city clerk, and I thought about that earlier, and my apologies for not mentioning it. But assuming that the amendment that I offered passes, and actually it's not an amendment right now, it's just part of the regular motion, there would need to be some cleanup done to some of the other sections of the document. So what I would propose, Councilmember Gearbaugh, assuming the motion passes, is that the clerk can probably work between now and our next meeting to make those changes. Email that out to the group. I can't imagine there would be any objections to some relatively minor housekeeping things. And then bring that back on, our next meeting would be the 29th for approval.
Okay. Yeah, as fine as we do that and kind of define what that means in terms of city-owned lots at this present date, that's fine. The other question I had on was of course, the idea of if you have to move a foundation, not charge the other person, but why are we charging the family that we have to? It seems kind of odd that we would charge one and not charge the other. I would rather we not even, it's part of perpetual care.
Do you want to comment on, I appreciate you bringing that up, as Mr. Campbell, Councilwoman Tahar, and Clerk Royal can attest. We also had a pretty lengthy discussion about that item at one of our recent task force meetings as well. I appreciate, Mr. Fordyce, perhaps you can comment on that.
So the issue is that in certain grave spaces, when we're digging that grave, an adjacent stone or foundation may need to be moved. And I believe the initial proposal was that the cost of that foundation replacement would be paid by the owner of the foundation, which after debate, I think seemed unfair to most members of the committee, since they weren't doing anything to cause the need for it. And so that cost is being borne in this proposal here by the Perpetual Care Fund. So if you've got family stone A here, and we dig family B grave here, and because of the soil conditions or access problems, we have to remove this foundation, the first one, the Perpetual Care Fund will fund that replacement. So there won't be any cost to the owner of that foundation.
Right, which is fine. I'm just saying, is it that much for us to do that? It just seems that we're going to have to be doing a more administrative tracking and paying attention to whose stone are we moving versus who we aren't and who's going to get charged. And it's just kind of like, if it's coming out of the Perpetual Care Fund, if you have to dig a grave and you have to move that foundation, that's part of our responsibility as oversight of that whole cemetery. It seems like we're dinging somebody at the time when you really don't want to be digging them just because we're burying.
Well, no, my understanding was that we're not. We're not dinging anybody. Is that?
Well, the way I read this allows for a foundation that needs to be removed for a non-relative burial, the foundation will be replaced by a Perpetual Care Fund at no expense to the owner. I'm talking about the relative. Why force someone to have to pay for it when we're going to have to dig it no matter what?
What non-relative means is that somebody who's not related to the foundation that we're digging.
I'm just saying, why are we worried about that? If we're not going to make somebody pay it on one site, why are we making the person that owns that site have to pay for it?
We're not.
It's just, you are though, this is non-relative. But you're saying that we're not going to charge anybody for moving any stone. I want to clarify that. this reads like a non-relative.
Well,
that
so
if I was buried in this plot, and my uncle is buried in the other plot, and we go to move that stone, I'm going to get charged for moving that one stone. I just want to make sure it's clear that nobody's getting charged anything.
Right. Well, the situation I can see where we might charge is if an owner of multiple lots installed a family stone and that had to be moved to dig the other spaces. That would be the only situation where I think we would be charging for that. Or if somebody put in cremains and then put in a stone and then later wanted to put in a full burial on that site, we would have to charge them for removal of the stone and removal of the cremains.
Also talked about.
Which was, yeah, that cremain full-size burial was another issue. So there are situations where the owners of the lot, or the owners of the burial rights, create their own problems. And I think it's legitimate to charge them for those situations. But this was specifically to absolve adjacent lot owners of responsibility, financial responsibility for things that happen as a result of a burial next to them.
Okay.
So it's not necessarily related or not related, it's ownership of the lot. So if, in your example, you own one and your uncle owns another, that's not the kind of relative that we're talking about here. It's the ownership, and the family lots.
Got it. Well, I could see where that could be an issue if you have one family lot and you have different people buried in there that aren't related.
Yeah.
This could be, I think it's going to be a hit and miss type of enforcement.
When the group reconvenes, I think we're slated to have another meeting in the spring. We can discuss this issue again.
Yeah.
And see if there's opportunity or interest to modify the verbiage further. Anything else, Councilmember Gearboff?
Not at this time.
Thank you, sir. Councilmember Seal.
Just so I understand your amendment completely correctly, people who spoke tonight who already own burial rights are free to go ahead and convey that. It's people who would buy those burial rights tomorrow or thereafter.
Correct.
Would be governed by the new policy. Okay,
Correct.
thank you.
Trying to create a compromise between competing interests. Yeah. Mr. Gearboff.
Just one other thing. On Sunday burials, is there going to be a condition that if someone is available to do that? I'm trying to think normally we wouldn't have buried on Sunday, and that's now a overtime issue.
It's almost as if you were in the meeting, because everything that you're bringing up was generated a protracted, in-depth discussion, but I appreciate that. Mr. Fordyce?
Right. The availability and labor costs on Saturday and Sunday are the same. So as long as it's not a holiday, there's no real difficulty with availability, and the fee covers the additional labor costs for weekend work.
I just didn't want to make it seem that we have to force someone to come in to do something that we normally haven't done in the past. So.
No different than a Saturday.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Fordyce. Anything further? No subsequent discussion, okay? Then we'll proceed to vote. I'm going to, again, read the motion in its entirety. It's been properly moved by Mayor Pro Tem Rhodes, seconded by Councilwoman Dillon, to acknowledge receipt of the January 7th, 2016 memo from Clerk Royal and to approve and adopt the changes to the Oakwood Cemetery rules and regulations and to amend number 1 to reflect a start date of February 2nd, 2016, meaning this policy would not be retroactive. All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it, and the motion carries unanimously. We move on to new business item 16-25, resolution in opposition to Public Act 269. This will be a motion to approve and adopt the resolution in opposition to Public Act 269. Is there a motion?
Yep, so moved.
So moved by Councilmember Seal. Thank you, sir. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Councilwoman Tahar.
Yes.
Do you want to comment on this at all?
This is for the, what they're calling the gag order. There's now a lawsuit pending trying to get this removed from law. But I wanted to bring this to City Council so that we can show them our support that we are against this particular House bill or act now. So.
Any other comments from anyone, questions? Ms. Carr?
Yes, I would like to make a comment, and if you'll indulge me, I wrote it out because I'm a little mentally absent, and I wanted to make sure I covered all my points. I want to first say I'm fully in favor of this resolution. And I also want to note that I have received comments from our public that our council discussion of this matter has been too partisan, and that this is a nonpartisan body, and our comments have not stayed on a nonpartisan level. And I would say it's true at this moment that one party controls state government, and our discussions may have mentioned that party by name, and possibly not in a very positive way. And I want to also say if I participated in any way in that kind of comment in the heat of the moment, I apologize for that. That was misdirection. And I think it detracts from the central issue. And I do not apologize for protesting bad legislation and bad policy. I believe that our objections to this and some other actions taken by our state legislature over many years have nothing to do with the party affiliation of those members of the state government who brought the matters forward. Speaking for myself, my objections to this particular law are objections to the very real danger of harm to local institutions, by which I mean local governments, schools, and libraries, harm to voters, harm to taxpayers, and harm to all the citizens that these local institutions serve. This is especially compelling for me personally as a librarian, that is, as a person for whom intellectual freedom is a fundamental principle of my profession, and I carry that to the rest of my activities. What this means to me is that a publicly supported institution provides free, equal, and equitable access to information for all people of the community it serves. I believe government and schools have the same responsibility as libraries, and that this law, Public Act 269, directly impedes and prohibits free, equal, and equitable access. This, too, may be considered a partisan point of view. My partisanship in objection to this is for the good of the citizens and of our community and the institutions that work to serve them. So I fully support this resolution.
Well said, Councilmember Terhar, and I'll return the chair to Mayor Morrow.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Additional comments on this item? Councilmember Seal.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I too have very strong feelings about this. I personally am, I want to say, victimized by this law at this point in time. I'm part of a movement right now that's going to be appearing on the ballot on March the 8th, and I'm prohibited from speaking about that publicly, which I view as a fundamental role that I should be playing in informing the public of why this request is appearing on the ballot. We've had to go to great lengths to appear on our own time, using our own vehicles, using our own property to make the public aware as minimally as we can, and treading on eggshells, if you will, to try and skirt the provisions that this law presently has in place. And I find it reprehensible. So I fully support this.
Thank you, Councilman Seal. Anything further? Mr. Gearbuck, tough acts to follow.
Yeah, I know. I'm just going to concur with you. This was a direct hit upon local government, local control. We are out to our own destiny. We have too many individuals that are pushing forward to try and remove that because of issues and private concerns. This has been clear type of issues that have been coming out of Lansing, whether it's partisan or nonpartisan, but it's clear where this is coming from. And I think at this point in time, if we don't continue to press on this thing, we're going to lose more and more of our ability to govern ourselves, which is something that's precious and something that we need to keep in our control.
Thank you, sir. Additional comments? No, then we'll proceed to vote. It's been properly moved by Councilman Seal, seconded by Councilwoman Tahar to approve. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it, the motion carries unanimously. We move on to new business item 16-26. This is proposed ordinance number 779, rezoning of 218 Monroe Street. We're actually going to break this up. At at the beginning here, the chair will entertain a motion to acknowledge receipt of the January 14th, 2016 memo from Assistant City Clerk DeHaan.
So moved.
It's been moved by Gearboss to acknowledge receipt. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Councilwoman Dillon. I know that Assistant Clerk DeHaan is not here, but perhaps Mr. Rubel or Mr. Campbell would care to comment on this?
In the packet, you'll find the zoning application from Mr. Mark Lewis for the property owned by Mr. Lance Holland. Attached to that is the zoning report from our planning consultant that was presented to the Planning Commission. The Planning Commission recommended it for approval to the City Council because the rezoning itself is valid and supportive of the master plan and the plan to move forward and develop that property. So the recommendation then was for council to consider its approval, I mean. The one condition was, of course, that the back taxes, the delinquent taxes be paid. We know we have a city policy that requires all taxes that are delinquent and all charges that are delinquent to be paid before this body can actually take favorable action on it. And so I believe the status of that right now is not fulfilled, from what I hear. So that could be probably confirmed by the city treasurer.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Rubel. Why don't you stay tight for just a second there, Gary, just in the event that there are questions from City Council. Are there any questions for our city superintendent? No? Ms. Bennett? Oh, I'm sorry. We got two down here. I apologize. Let's start with Ms. Tahar, followed by Councilwoman Dillon. My apologies, ladies.
Yes, thank you. Mr. Rubel, can you, in a nutshell, summarize what's the difference between 1A and 1C zoning?
Basically, it's the density and ability to use the land in proportion to what the development has the potential for. It's a very irregular piece of property. To get ideally the size of the density under the prior zoning, the ideal thing would have been square and the streets fit right in the middle and everything else, but in order to get the density he needs probably to make it constructible and profitable and feasible is to go from the R1A to R1C, which does agree with the adjoining properties, master plan, and would be harmonious for the area.
So 1C allows for more density, essentially?
A few lots. He actually, because of the way the land is formed, with the slopes and irregularities, basically he's only going to get the same number of houses on there because of having to provide for utilities, roads, detention, and so forth. He really is only going to get the density of the R1A, but he needs the R1C basically for the setbacks. That's the distances between the house and the lot lines. So the answer is like yes and no. Okay. If it was R1C, if it was R1A, he wouldn't get the density of the R1A, but with the R1C, he actually does get the density of the R1A.
Thank you.
Ms. Dillon, please.
That was pretty much my question. The second part was, are we at all concerned that he could jump from 17 units to 25? Because the C is going to go up there.
Well, I believe Mr. Lewis informed the Planning Commission, and looking at the concept plan with our planner, it probably would not be physically possible to do that, knowing the constraints on the property, slopes, grades, and the fact that some of the south part of it actually is in the floodplain. So it's very doubtful that it would get beyond what it is.
Thank you.
Any additional questions for our city superintendent? No? Thank you, Gary. Ms. Bennett, do you want to confirm the issue of taxes?
At this point, there's still a balance owing on the 2015 taxes. Delinquent taxes at the county level have been resolved. A partial payment was made in our office today.
Okay. Very good. Appreciate the update. I do know that the applicant is in the audience this evening. We appreciate your time. Would you care to make any comment this evening? You don't have to, but we would welcome that if that is your wish.
Good evening, Mark Lewis. The only comment would be in terms of increasing the density. There's no feasible way to increase the density on that particular parcel of property. So 17 units will be what's been proposed, but will be what's built if it is approved.
Very good. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Anything further on this motion? And again, the motion that's on the floor was moved by Councilman Gearboss, seconded by Councilwoman Dillon to acknowledge receipt of the January 14th, 2016 memo. If there's nothing further, then we'll proceed to vote. All those in favor of acknowledging receipt signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it, and the motion carries unanimously. Here's something that I just developed, which we could entertain as a motion. I'll read it if there's somebody who's inclined to move and to second. So the subsequent motion would be a motion to accept or not to accept the Planning Commission's recommendation and to approve or not to approve the proposed ordinance number 779 for the rezoning of 218 Monroe Street from R1A Family Residential to R1C Single Family Residential, contingent upon all outstanding taxes being paid. And if you wanted to put a period of time on that, that would be acceptable as well. What's your pleasure?
I find that to be a worthwhile amendment. I could see where the gentleman might not want to invest more funds without knowing if he's going to get the rezoning or not.
Okay, so just the way I read it then, Mr. Rhodes?
Yes, I would move that.
Okay, is there a second? Seconded by Councilman Seal, okay? Let me just reread that one more time for the dais' benefit as well as the audience. So this is a motion then to accept the Planning Commission's recommendation and to approve the proposed ordinance number 779 for rezoning of 218 Monroe Street from R1A Family Residential to R1C Single Family Residential, contingent upon all outstanding taxes being paid. Sound okay to you, Mayor Pro Tem?
It does. Are
Okay.
there any fees in there? The cover memo talks about taxes and fees. I don't know if there are any fees.
Would be appropriate to add fees to that, Ms. Bennett? Okay. Contingent upon all outstanding taxes and fees being paid. Mr. CO, are you comfortable with that addition? It's pretty innocuous. Mr. Rhodes?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Discussion. Councilman Gearbaum.
As we've had this in the past, we've had concerns that this type of stuff coming forward to us without being properly paid for and so forth is setting a precedent. I think at this point in time, besides putting that on there, I think we're opening ourselves up to continued potential issues coming forward to us where the taxes have not been paid and not properly resolved for the property. I will not be supporting this vote.
Okay. Additional comments? Well, let me just say that I understand that concern, and I'm sympathetic to that. At the same time, I think there is a commitment to resolve the outstanding taxes and fees, as City Treasurer Bennett articulated just moments ago. A portion of those have been paid. I have no doubt in the coming days the remaining balance will be paid. And I also want to note, as I did at the most recent Planning Commission meeting, that this is an issue and a project that has been vetted and explored over the course of many years. The current deed holder and I had a conversation about this proposed development early on in my tenure as mayor, I think in the early months, as a matter of fact, of 2013. I think it's an important project. I look forward to reviewing and vetting and hearing more at upcoming Planning Commission meetings. This developer has a solid reputation. As Mr. Rubel said, there's some inherent challenges to developing this parcel. At the same time, it's a very nice parcel within close proximity to our downtown, and will create additional housing opportunities in our community, which I think is of vital importance. So while I think this motion and this approach is far from perfect, I do support it and look forward to being thorough, but also moving expeditiously to see this come to fruition. Is there anything further?
Mr. Mayor, may I ask that you reread the motion one more time?
Absolutely, I'd be happy to, Councilman CO. So the second motion would be to accept the Planning Commission's recommendation and to approve the proposed ordinance number 779 for the rezoning of 218 Monroe Street from R1A Family Residential to R1C Single Family Residential, contingent upon all outstanding taxes and fees being paid.
Very good. Thank you, sir.
Okay. Anything further on this? No, then we'll proceed to vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay.
Nay.
Ayes have it, and the motion carries 6-1. We move on to new business item 14-134. This is wastewater treatment improvement phase 2 pay estimate number 5. This will be a motion to acknowledge receipt of the January 19th, 2016 memo from City Superintendent Engineer Rubel and to approve or not to approve the contractor's application for payment number 5 in the amount of $85,928.56. Is there a motion?
Move to acknowledge receipt and to approve.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Rhodes. Is there a second?
Second.
I'll give that one to Councilwoman Dillon. We'll get you on the next one, Councilwoman Tahar. Who would like to comment on this? Mr. Rubel, Mr. Skull? Bob, in the event that there's some technical questions, why don't you come forward to the podium and just hang out for a bit?
All right, thank you, Mayor. This closes out basically the fall, winter phase of the construction work, although by the weather we're having, it's like fall or spring, but this takes care of some final winter and late fall items as far as completing some of the work at the filter building, and also picks up a few items that were approved with the change order at one of the recent council meetings. We did attach a photo page here so you can visually see some of the improvement areas, and one of which was the rebuilding of the pump base, which was extra work, was found to be disintegrated when they tried to replace some pump motors. So with that, I just ask if you had any questions.
Mr. Skull, any comment?
No. No, the condition of the pump bases were worse when they actually got to working on them than we anticipated. Other than that, I have no comment.
Fair enough. Questions for our city superintendent or wastewater treatment plant superintendent? No? Okay, gentlemen, thank you. We'll proceed to vote then unless there are comments or any discussion. No? It's been properly moved then by Mayor Pro Tem Rhodes, seconded by Councilwoman Dillon to acknowledge receipt and to approve. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it, the motion carries unanimously. Again, noting that new business item 16-27 was removed from the agenda as an action item this evening, but I will discuss it under the discussion portion in hopefully just a bit. We move on now to new business item 16-28. This is Hydro Cross Connection Consultant. This will be a motion to acknowledge receipt of the January 27, 2016 memo from DPW Director Fordyce and to approve or not to approve the 3-year agreement with HydroCore Incorporated in the amount of $11,100 and to authorize or not authorize the mayor clerk to execute the agreement upon review and approval by the city attorney.
Move to acknowledge receipt and to approve and
Thank
to
you.
Thank
Thank you, Councilwoman Tahar. Is there a second?
A second.
Seconded by Councilman Seal. Mr. Fordyce, the floor is yours, sir.
Thank you. HydroCorp and their Vice President Paul Patterson is here, who can answer some of the technical questions about the cross-connection program. They've been our cross-connection consultant for 6 years now, I believe, and set up our original program, wrote the program and got it approved by the state, and have been operating that for us ever since. They do an excellent job. They schedule all the inspections, do the inspections, do the reporting, and keep us in compliance with the state requirements on cross connections.
Can I interrupt you, Mr. Fordyce?
Certainly.
Where is our guest? Right. Oh, I'm sorry. Very good. Thank you. Just didn't know who he was. So, my apologies.
Currently, our program covers commercial, industrial, and multifamily properties. And the issue that I want to bring to your attention tonight is that the state rules under which this program has been developed also cover residential properties. And the DEQ has kind of slowly, region by region, been bringing residential properties into this program. And in my memo, I mentioned that when that happens, we'll see a 3 to 4 times increase in this expense. It's really more along the 5 to 6 times, $55,000 to $60,000 a year is what we'll be looking at when DEQ requires us to bring residential properties into the program. And some of those will be initial startup costs, but going forward, our costs will be significantly more.
I guess it is what it is. Yeah. Would you care to make any comment this evening?
Only if there's questions.
Okay, fair enough. Questions for our guest or for our DPW Director, Mr. Fordyce? Mayor Pro Tem Rhodes.
Is there any opportunity for us to impact the proposed addition of residences to this program?
That would be a good question for Paul.
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
I just wonder if there's an opportunity for us to impact or delay or revise the inclusion of residences?
What has happened is, over the years, the residential portion of the program has always been a requirement. There's been a lack of enforcement. In October, Public Act 399 was revised, or the revisions were finally put into place, and those revisions specifically address the residential portion of the program. What I can't answer for is the enforcement side. I'm not sure where DEQ is going to be on this. So far, it's been friendly reminders, but based on history, the reminders are going to happen probably, well, it happened, I believe, at your last sanitary survey, which would tell me that the next one in 2 years, or every 3 years, it's probably going to be more of a, okay, we reminded you nicely, now it's going to become a requirement. Again, I can't speak for DEQ. I can just kind of tell you how history was, or the way they've reacted in the past.
Does the revision address the frequency of inspections for residences?
No, what the revision does is they have a cross-connection control, which used to be called a rules manual, which they had to change the wording to a guidance manual. Basically, they were enforcing a manual as a rule that never went through the rules-making process. So now what they did in the revision, it says a water utility shall use the rules manual or the guidance manual as a guidance. Then inside that manual, it specifies, and it doesn't say residential specifically. Basically, it says high hazard facilities should be inspected every year, low hazard every 2 to 4 years, minimum once every 5 to 10. So the maximum you could go, according to that, would be once every 10 years, inspect the homes. What we have been recommending is the first time through, the community is probably going with more like a 5-year frequency to get through the whole community for the first time. Because what happens after that, you can eliminate many homes. The rules allow for facilities and homes not to be part of the program. The issue is most people, most communities don't have the records that they need to say, okay, this home is eliminated, this one has to be in the program, because it's based on the water uses, the plumbing inside the home, what they're using water for. The other issue is once the residents are in the program, there are testable backflow prevention assemblies that require testing. The maximum length of time you can go for testing those is once every 5 years. So if you're going on a 10-year program, you're going to have residents that may be getting hit with a testing requirement maybe 2 or more times before everybody in the community. So it might be unfair to some people, depending on how the numbers work out.
And I guess I can infer from one of your statements that it's not only inspection of the exterior of the home, but it's said to be the interior plumbing also?
Technically, by the rule, yes.
That sounds to me like a court issue just waiting to happen. I don't see how inspectors can force their way into somebody's home if they wish them not to come in.
I understand.
Anyway, I see issues. That's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Councilman Gearbaugh?
And on that vein, how are you making sure compliance is actually happening on the properties that we have currently being inspected? Because I know I represent a commercial property uptown that received a letter from your company, but it went to the tenant, and I don't know whether or not it actually got done. And so that's where I'm trying to figure out if they wanted to come into the building and actually look in the drains and whatever and do that.
Right.
So how is compliance happening? Are all of these 291 commercial and industrial facilities complying? Or what's our report in terms of, I've never seen the results come back, and maybe Jeff would explain that.
Yeah, there's an annual report as part of the contract, and Paul and I sit down and review the inspections for the year. And they do follow-up inspections. So anytime there's a non-compliance letter issued, there is follow-up on that. And our program is designed and intended to be friendly. We're not coming in with a hammer to get people to comply, but we send notices, we send another notice, and work with the property owners to attain compliance. So there are follow-up inspections, and these inspections, the high hazard ones, are every year. But if you do get a non-compliance notice, you will get inspected again in the next round to make sure that those devices have been repaired or installed or tested as necessary.
And so how successful have we been annually? 100% compliance, 90%?
I'm trying to recall from our last one, I think there were 3 properties that were in the compliance process.
Okay.
So, out of the 103 inspections that were done.
Yeah, I'm just trying to make sure that I'm in compliance, so I just want to make sure that we did what we were supposed to. Thank
What
you.
was that address again?
So there are non-compliance notices, but not compliance notices? Addressing Mr. Gerbaugh's situation there, he doesn't know if he's in or out. Can one assume if you don't get a non-compliance notice that you're in compliance?
Yes.
We
Unless the
notify
letter got
of-
lost somewhere or something.
Yes, we notify of compliance or non-compliance, so either way, there would be some sort of notification. Usually, the compliance is taken care of on site.
Yeah, in this example, the letter went to my father's name, but to the address of the tenant. And so somehow, eventually, the letter got to the wrong address, but we finally figured it out. So
Right,
I don't
yeah.
know.
And those, there are a couple of address database issues, tenant information versus owner information, and, often the tenant is the best way to get into the facility, and they're the ones who actually have the equipment in there. So they're the folks that we need to talk to. Other times it's the property owner, and, so there are a couple cases like that where things get a little bit confused.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that we are in compliance. Okay, thank you.
I guess I'd like to suggest that your inspectors have a little pad of forms or something with them that they can fill out and say, this address is inspected on this date and it's in compliance, and leave it at the
Yeah, and
property
actually-
site, because in one of my buildings, the inspector came through, looked at things and said, you're in compliance, and walked out the door. I have no record that it was actually there.
Okay.
Maybe that's not in compliance with your rules and policies,
It's
but
not,
that's what
and I
happened.
will-
And I'm not going to tell you which building.
Typically, what they should be doing is, we have a green compliance tag, and if everything is fine in that building, they are supposed to initial date that tag, let you know everything's fine, and then what they do is they put that tag at or near the water meter, is what we ask them to do.
Okay.
And that's so, a couple reasons, you're in compliance, you have something on site, but if there is an issue in that building and someone from the water department has to go out, they will also see that tag and know that we've been there and there shouldn't be any issues inside the building.
Well, I'll check all my buildings and make sure they got a green tag.
Ditto.
Any additional questions for either Mr. Fordyce or our guest? Gentlemen, thank you very much. Any subsequent discussion? No, then it's been properly moved by Councilwoman Tahar, seconded by Councilmember Seo, to acknowledge receipt, to approve, and to authorize. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it, the motion carries unanimously. We move on to new business item 16-29. This is Street Lighting Coalition. This will be a motion to acknowledge receipt of the January 27, 2016 memo from DPW Director Fordyce, and to approve or not to approve the Michigan Street Lighting Coalition additional member funding request at $1,100, or $1, excuse me.
Move to acknowledge and to approve.
Thank you, Councilmember Gearboss. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Councilwoman Dillon. Mr. Fordyce, do you care to make any comment on this, sir?
Just briefly, I provided you an update at a recent meeting on the coalition's activities, and this is the next step. the members of the coalition voted to continue the coalition as the negotiating party or body, and they require additional funding to do that. So.
Very good. Any questions for our DPW director? Mayor Pro Tem.
Do you have any idea how many of the other communities that were involved have approved the additional funding?
I do not. This funding request just came out January 27th, so I would assume that not too many of them have had an opportunity to act on it yet.
Okay. I'd like to not be the only community that contributes additional funds and others don't step to the plate and then the program doesn't happen.
Right. Well, the budget, the decision to function this way and the budget was approved by the coalition, which is the member communities. So at least their representatives at the meetings were on board with this, and they're all bringing it back to their legislative bodies. So.
Can you, I think that's an excellent point, though. Can you keep us in the loop on that and maybe share some information with City Manager Campbell? And I think his weekly communicated council might be the best way to disseminate that information.
Okay.
Anything else, Mayor Pro Tem?
That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Additional questions? Former Mayor Pro Tem, Councilwoman Tar.
Not a question, but a comment. I greatly appreciate the work the coalition has done in this so far, and I think it's a really valuable investment.
Good. Anything further? Mr. Fordyce, thank you. Appreciate your time. Additional discussion? No, then we'll proceed to vote. It's been properly moved by Councilman Gearboss, seconded by Councilwoman Dillon to acknowledge receipt and to approve. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it. The motion carries unanimously. We move on to new business item 16-30. This is citywide fee book revisions and changes. This will be a motion to acknowledge receipt of the January 27, 2016 memo from City Superintendent Engineer Rubel and to approve or not to approve the citywide fee book revisions and changes as submitted.
Move to acknowledge receipt and to approve.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Rhodes. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Councilman Seal. Mr. Rubel, please, the floor is yours to go over your memo of January the 27th and to maybe outline some of the significant changes in the fee book.
Thank you, Mayor. Each year, we ask staff to look through the fee book, which is on our website. It's about a 17, 18-page document. It includes all the fees of all the departments within the city, so it's convenient to find, locate, and review. So every year, we ask for input from staff for recommended changes. Generally, those are those fees that are 5 or more years older or need some type of adjustment either for inflationary reasons or because maybe material labor costs have increased or time demands have increased for those fees. Even though we do this annually, this time of year to coincide with the FY17 work budget effort, because we have two sides of the equation. We have the expenses and the revenues to consider. So there's a fair share of user fees to look at. And we try to keep those in balance, and so they're fair and equitable for our users also, and cover some of our costs. As you can see, there's one spreadsheet that we use annually, and it shows proportionately comparison between the current fee, the proposed fee. In some cases, you'll see where maybe there's a new fee, where we had to either create a fee because of a service or because we needed a bracket to separate or split a fee for consideration, and then add that to the fee book. Even though this is an annual effort on this part, the question came about, someone questioned why only some departments reported and some didn't, and the fact is that some don't have fee changes because the existing fees are stable, don't need changes, or they're up to date, and the other reason is some costs are not able to be derived at this time. So as we've done in past years, we've done an early fee change for the year, and then we followed up with one like in March or April, and so we have that opportunity. You'll probably see us back here in March or April with probably some other fees to adjust.
Thank you, Mr. Rubel. Questions for our city superintendent engineer? Easier than I thought. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Subsequent discussion or comments? Mayor Pro Tem Rhodes.
I would just like to say that some of the percentages seem rather high, but the dollar amounts do not, so it's because they're operating for such a low base to begin with.
Right, correct.
Did you have something, Mr. Gearboff, please?
Yeah, just, I mean, the other, just site, looking at this, is the issue of some of these fees haven't been raised in 13 or 14 years. Am I reading that correctly? Like the fingerprinting?
That's how I would read it.
Well, some fees actually, they were pretty stable over the years, and then, for instance, the fingerprinting fee is actually, I believe the state is involved with setting the base rate for that, and I believe that's why we just now adjusted it.
Okay. No, I just look at the ones where there might potentially be any kind of salary or hourly type wage involved, and those should have been adjusted in order to be current, but I guess that was just one of them. Thank you.
Additional comments? Again, thank you, Mr. Rubel. If there's nothing further, then we'll proceed to vote. It's been properly moved by Mayor Pro Tem Rhodes, seconded by Councilman CO to acknowledge receipt and to approve. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it, the motion carries unanimously. And now we move on to new business item 16-31. This is 2016 design and bid phase for 2016 street projects. This will be a motion to acknowledge receipt of the January 27, 2016 memo from City Superintendent Engineer Rubel and to approve or not to approve the design, bid, and construction service proposal from Midwest Consulting LLC.
Move to acknowledge receipt and to approve.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Rhodes. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Councilwoman Tahar. You're on deck again, Mr. Rubel. Do you want to go over your memo of January the 27th?
Thank you, Mayor. As we do with all of our capital improvement projects that we bid, where we have developed the request for proposals and send it to engineering firms, we have 4 responses here for the 2016 street improvements projects. The base project here are the 3 streets in Maplewood Farms. Subsequently, in past years, we've been, after the bids are taken and if there are reserved funds, we sometimes add a project. As you recall, last year we added Echo Court and Park Place to finish those 2 off, and then at the same time we attached the recreation parking lot improvement project to that bid, and that turned out quite well also. So we took advantage of some of those prices in that way. So the low, after review by myself and some confirmation from Mr. Fordyce, we reviewed the 4 proposals we received, and of course Midwestern Consulting merited the recommendation here. Not only did they have the best base fee, but they have actually the most experience here. Their lead engineer, design engineer, is Mr. Scott Fisher, and he is here tonight there in the white shirt, and he was more recently at a planning commission meeting because his firm provides the engineering for the Risden Heights project, which was approved for Henry Street. He performed the engineering for last year's very successful project on North Harris Street, as well as many other projects in the past. 2014, it was the North Ann Arbor Street reconstruction, which turned out quite well too. So with that, we recommended approval by the Planning Commission. And I noted that we have the engineering fees set up in the FY16 budget, the construction fees and amounts, and any site engineering would be in the FY17 budget, yet to be approved by council.
Anything further, Mr. Rubel?
I'll answer
you.
questions if you like.
Okay. We appreciate you being here, by the way. Thank you. Questions either for our guest or for Mr. Rubel? Mayor Pro Tem Rhodes.
Is this rework within that subdivision going to be what I believe is commonly called mill and fill, or is it going to be an overlay?
Correct. I mean, it has to be a mill and fill because of the deterioration of the asphalt layer. It goes really all the way down to the base. And what we often do is take that whole deteriorated asphalt layer off. We recondition the base, which means it gets some of the limestone may get rejuvenated, it'll get recompacted, because we're dealing with the original construction out there, which changes since the original, it changes since its original condition. There may have been settlement and some other defects underneath the asphalt. Also, at the same time that we take the asphalt off, we can also perform some minor drainage improvements, like under drains.
So it'll have typically 4 inches of asphalt?
4.5 inches is a desirable depth here. When the subdivision was built, it wasn't that standard, of course. That's probably why it didn't last more than 1989 till now, maybe 1990 till now. Of course, that's 26 years, so it's got its useful life fulfilled.
Very good.
Okay, thank you. I think it's really important that we maintain our infrastructure, particularly our roads that are visible to folks coming into our community.
Also, excuse me, I forgot to mention, it's PA 283 funds are applied to this. We have to have one last year. Last year it was Harris Street. This year it's Maplewood Farms. We will have a match of our own from our own funds. And the reason it's Maplewood Farms, it's far away from US 12. So we don't want to deal with those conflicts.
Anything else for Mr. Rubel? Thank you, sir. Any subsequent discussion? No, that's been properly moved by Mayor Pro Tem Rhodes, seconded by Councilwoman McClellan to acknowledge receipt and to approve. Say again? Did I get that wrong?
Second.
I'm sorry. Seconded by Tahar. I apologize. Ms. McClellan, my mistake. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it, the motion carries unanimously. Again, we've already voted on new business item 16-32, so we will proceed with the discussion portion of our agenda. First up, our commission, committee, and task force reports from council members. Councilwoman Tahar.
Yes, I'm pleased to report the Arts and Culture Committee members were very happy to hear from former council member and current Parks Commission member Jim Peters that the Michigan Historical Commission has approved the request for a state marker that is planned to address how Saline got its name and the impact of the salt springs. This is a project that the Arts and Culture Committee is funding and the Parks Commission has sponsored, and that the Historical Society is also involved with. So that was very good news.
Good. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Peters. Additional commission, committee, or task force reports from council members? No? How about reports or other announcements? Did you want to, Mr. Campbell, you distributed the goal, the community vision in advance of our retreat on Friday and Saturday. Do you want to comment on this at all?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, I'll just point out you have before you some preparatory kind of homework, if you will, for council is prepare for Saturday's work group for reviewing and potentially updating the current 2020 vision tour, the strategic plan that council worked with Dr. Lou Bender last year, and so he'll be back this weekend to do just that. So we have the top one is where we are currently. This is the one that we've been updating every couple meetings, and then we have status from the various departments for their responsible areas in the strategic plan. So happy to answer any questions now or between now and Saturday, and so anyway, so there it is.
Very good. Thank you. Any questions or comments for City Manager Campbell? No? Well, please bring that document with you on Friday and Saturday, and look forward to having a robust discussion and hopefully making some changes, but also reflecting on the progress we've made, as a community these last couple of years. Other reports or announcements? Mr. Gearbaugh, please.
Just one question I'd like to bring up potentially in the future is this potential impact on historic districts. There's a bill going through that was brought up by our former council member, Ms. Cybo-Koenig, about the potential of changing how that whole oversight handles and everything, and it could be detrimental to the creation of what we already have put in place. So if we could have some feedback on that, I think it would be great, and even HDC, I think, would be benefit from that.
I appreciate you bringing that up. The bill, I think it was, if I recall correctly, Councilmember Gearbaugh, former Councilwoman Cybo-Koenig provided a link on Facebook and tagged, I believe, you, myself, possibly Councilwoman Dillon, and a few others. The article doesn't reference the bill number or the sponsor. The sponsor is Representative Affan Doofus. Excuse me, that wasn't a Freudian slip. Affan Doofus. from the East Grand Rapids area. And I would be inclined to, one, see that item, that bill, and I believe the bill by this point should have a nonpartisan House fiscal analysis attached to it if you go to the Michigan Legislative website and look up the bill and/or the author. I think that and the material that Councilwoman Seibel Koenig, former Councilwoman Seibel Koenig sent us, should be reviewed at the next HDC meeting, which is this Wednesday, is that correct?
No, that meeting was canceled.
The meeting was canceled, so we would have to wait till, at the earliest, then the 1st of March, correct?
Correct.
Okay, but perhaps in the meantime, we can have something on one of our upcoming agendas and consider passing a resolution not unlike what we did today on a current statute.
Yeah, I'd like to address it sooner than later because it potentially could become another one of these rush-through legislative actions that we know we just objected to 15 minutes ago.
Okay.
But I know part of it was that I had linked, I sent him an email following that with a link to the bill, but I don't know exactly the number at this point in time, so.
Can you, I'll be in the office sometime this week, can you remind me, we can pull the bill and then the fiscal analysis, and maybe we can even print off the material that Councilwoman Seibel Koenig sent us. Maybe we can draft a resolution, and then, Mr. Gearbaugh, not unlike what we've done with other resolutions in the past, perhaps because of your expertise and passion, we could send a draft to you, and then also Councilwoman Dillon, who's the council liaison to HDC, for your comments before bringing it to City Council.
Yeah, since we've done this transition, I think both of us will be passionate about this issue, so I appreciate that.
Very good. Councilman Seal?
I think there was an interesting article in the, was it the Chamber of Commerce magazine that came to us with our council packet? Ms. Royal?
I think it was the Michigan Municipal League.
MML? I think there was an interesting article in there about this very bill.
Okay.
So I might want to check in there, too. Yes.
In the review, okay. All right.
Will do.
Yeah, excellent, okay. Well, then expect something to digest and discuss at our next council meeting then on the 29th regarding this issue. Any other reports or announcements? Just as a follow-up to new business item 16-27 that was removed from tonight's agenda, I had some brief discussions with several of you, not all, and I also spoke to the city manager and the chief today. Obviously, it's an issue that we want to be very thoughtful about. I have some outstanding questions, and what I would recommend at this juncture is to schedule a work meeting to discuss this issue. We actually haven't had a work meeting in several months now, and we do not have a work meeting currently scheduled for February the 29th. So what I'd like to propose, and I'd like to see if it works with everyone's schedule, is to just have an hour-long work meeting to discuss Lexipol and updating the policies and procedures of the police department beginning at 6:30 on the 29th. Mr. Rhodes, you and I discussed this. That would work for you?
That works for me, thank you.
Mr. Gearbaugh?
I don't have a problem having a work meeting, but I am concerned that it won't be televised or recorded.
Do we not?
Broadcast.
Do we not televise and record? Could we though?
Good. In this, because of the sensitivity of this subject, I think we should be doing that.
What is the, let me stay on that issue for just a moment. What's the inherent hardship of recording any of our work meetings?
We just have to make sure that Chase shows up.
Okay, okay. Because my opinion would be, why not record all of them?
Yeah, I think that's something we should move forward on doing.
Okay. Assuming we can find somebody like Chase who's competent, who can man the booth. Okay. Ms. McClellan, would that work for you? Yep. 6:30 on the 29th, okay. Ms. Tahar?
Yes.
Ms. Dillon?
Yes.
Mr. Seal?
Yes.
Okay. Then consider it scheduled. And then, of course, when subsequent action is required, if there's broad consensus on the 29th, in theory, it could go on the agenda later that evening, but I think in all honesty, something would appear for council discussion and consideration at one of our upcoming March meetings. Okay? So again, it's a work meeting at 6:30 on the 29th. Okay. Any other reports or announcements? Well, then we move on to our last discussion item, which is water quality update from our wastewater Superintendent Skull, as well as our DPW Director Fordyce. Let me give credit where credit's due. Gentlemen, you can come forward. I think it was Mr. Gearbaugh who sent out an email relating to this issue sometime last week to discuss this. I think that was an excellent suggestion, Councilmember Gearbaugh. I should also note that Bob Conrady, who's here in the audience this evening to my right, did a very nice piece on water quality in the Saline Post. I believe Mr. Campbell sent out the link sometime late last week. For those of you who have not read it, those of you who are either at the dais or in the audience, I encourage you to do so. Because of what's happening in Flint and elsewhere, this is something that's very much on people's radar, as it should be, because water quality is a fundamental right and responsibility of local units of government. And contaminated water is simply unacceptable, really egregious, quite frankly. So, city has a long history of dealing with this issue, and I invited, subsequent to seeing Mr. Gearbaugh's email, I had a conversation with our city manager and with our wastewater treatment plant superintendent about discussing this issue, for the record, at our council meeting. So, Bob, with that, didn't mean to be long-winded, but I'm going to turn it over to you.
No problem. As everybody's aware, there's a copper and lead issue with certain communities in the state, and I just wanted to review slightly what we've taken, the history of the study in the city of Saline, as well as methods we use to control corrosion in the system. We have been testing for copper and lead since 1993. We currently check every 3 years. We check 20 sites based on, and the 20 sites are based on population. That's where the number comes from. The last couple of studies, we've had no detection of lead in the water. We've had, we also go to great lengths to control the corrosion in the water with the new water plant. We do that by increasing the hardness of the water before it leaves the plant by mixing in some of the bypassed water that does not go through the water softener. Then we also add caustic soda to raise the pH up to a slightly higher to make it less corrosive. And we also add orthophosphate to the water to basically coat the pipes. Orthophosphate will provide a protective film on plumbing fixtures. And as a result, like I said earlier, we haven't had any copper and lead issues, but I know it's on everybody's mind. The houses we check are usually tier 1, which means there's a possibility of lead either in the solder or in some of the plumbing fixtures. Is there any questions? I mean, I don't.
Let me, if I recall correctly, you actually used my property to test water.
Mm-hmm.
Is that correct?
Yes.
So I can vouch for the fact that staff does it and they're thorough about it.
Yeah, copper and lead is one of the few contaminants that's actually checked for at people's plumbing, in the actual household and not at the source of the water, unlike most of the other things. We ask people to collect samples from a sink that's not used, so the water has a chance to set in the plumbing to pick up anything that may be present. This time we used the state lab for analysis. We've used commercial labs as well.
Thank you, Bob. Jeff, do you want to elaborate or add anything this evening?
Just, I guess, one addition to that. So, in addition to the monitoring that Bob does in his department, when we're doing water main projects, when we're tying over house leads to the new water main, if we run across any lead services, we would eliminate those. In my time here, we have not run across any lead service lines during our water main projects, but if that ever occurs, we would eliminate that from the system.
One quick question, I think it was addressed in the Post article. If there are residents or business owners who have concerns about water quality, of course they can contact either one of you. Is there also the ability to contact the Regional Environmental Protection Agency?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. One more thing, if anybody is concerned about lead in their water, I can provide sample bottles as well as procedures and the names and addresses of labs that are capable of running it.
Okay. Very good. Questions for these two gentlemen? Mr. Gearbaugh, please.
And the reason I really asked about this information was because there was more and more things coming up and people were getting concerned and you see more and more articles. I think it's good for us to recognize what great work you have done and contributed to keep our water clean and so forth. And also that we do provide this information as required on our website, and you do an annual report, and another one will be available shortly, I know that. Couple questions. When you're selecting individuals to test their water, how is that done? The 20 samples, are they consistently every year, or are they?
We try to remain as consistent as possible, but we're also looking for houses. I mean, it's not always, doesn't always work. We have some, last year we had to switch a couple homes because the owner, the house was no longer being used. It was temporarily abandoned. We looked for sites that were built around 1983 or beyond for the very copper and that could be in the flux for the solder as well as the fittings. Yeah, we are on a reduced schedule for copper and lead testing because we have not had any incidences of copper and lead. Our next scheduled copper and lead studies next summer 17. But again, if anybody has any questions, we can sample their homes.
I mean, we talk about lead and copper, but what other things potentially are in our water that we have to watch for? There isn't anything really, is there?
Well, there's always disinfection byproducts, which we check for yearly. Those are created by chlorine interacting with organic material in the water. They're cancer-causing, so we monitor them regularly. We also monitor bacteria levels in the water weekly, as well as chlorine residuals. We also check for volatile organic compounds, synthetic organic compounds, and all these are available on request, all the results.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Gearbaugh. Any other questions or comments? No. Gentlemen, thank you very much. Appreciate your work on this and taking the time to update not only us, but the community. And again, just to confirm, if people have questions or concerns, they can contact either one of you. And Bob, did you provide a link or a contact for the regional EPA in that article? Okay. I should get. Okay, very good. All right. Thank you again, gentlemen. At this time, unless there's anything further to be brought up under the discussion portion of our agenda, we move on to the second public comment period. Under the Open Meetings Act, any citizen may come forward at this time and make comment or question to City Council. This public comment period will be limited to 3 minutes per person. Anyone who would like to speak is requested, but not required to state his or her name and address for the record. Please, Barb.
Good evening, Council. My name is Barbara Fuller. I live at 17750 Sharon Valley Road in Manchester, Michigan. I'm here tonight to formally advise that I'm a candidate for state representative in the 52nd House District, which encompasses the city of Saline and most of the western half of Washtenaw County, with a couple of additional townships to the north, Salem and Northfield townships. I want to do more. I've been in community service for 25 to 30 years. I want to do more, particularly on infrastructure. I'm vice chair of the Road Commission currently. Roads are a big priority for me. Also, the infrastructure issues that you've discussed this evening as well are high priorities, and I believe the state has a role in those. I'm also an advocate for 21st century public education because I think our kids need an opportunity to be competitive in the world, and Saline has one of the best schools going. Congratulations on your bonding as well. That's very impressive. There's also an environmental stewardship issue that's of great concern to me. I think there have to be ways for us to protect the environment without stifling development or other types of advances, but it's very important to me that we protect the environment and our water and our green spaces. And finally, local control is something that I'm very concerned about. You've discussed some issues along those lines this evening. I see an encroachment by the legislature to preempt local decisions and local control, and all the issues you dealt with tonight are really only to be decided locally. I mean, the people in Lansing shouldn't be making decisions about your cemetery plots and how much they're being sold or transferred for. I would greatly appreciate your support. As I said, I'm vice chair of the Road Commission. I'm also a park commissioner. I'm currently on as a board member of the Michigan Broadband Coalition, which is devoted to extending broadband internet connectivity to the western half of the county and hopefully come up with a model that's scalable for the entire state, because there are under and unserved areas within almost a stone's throw from where we are now. And it's a real economic deficit for people. It's also an educational issue for kids who have iPads and go home and they can't do their homework and they're punished because they didn't complete an assignment, but they can't. So I would welcome your consideration, be grateful for your support. I'm available to answer questions at your convenience and would be happy to meet with any or all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Fuller. We appreciate your commitment and all that you've done for Western Washtenaw County. And I do want to note for my colleagues at the dais as well as the audience that in your capacity with the Broadband Coalition, you're actually going to be coming to an upcoming LDFA, TIFA, and EDC meeting to talk about high-speed internet. And we look forward to that discussion. That, as you and I have discussed, that could really be transformational. We appreciate your time this evening. Additional citizen comments? No, then I would note a couple changes. Our next council meeting, the strategic planning session on Friday evening does not begin at 5:30. It begins at 6 p.m. So please take note of that. 6 p.m., not 5:30. There's several of us who wouldn't be able to make it there by 5:30. So that's a 6 p.m. start time. Then on the 6th, we begin at 8 a.m. At the library. And then our next council meeting, contingent upon a change in schedule that was approved this evening, will be on February 29th with a work meeting at 6:30 to discuss the policy manual for the police department, and then a regular meeting at 7:30. There are no absences this evening, so I would entertain a motion to adjourn at, let's make it 9:45 p.m. even.
So moved.
Thank you, Councilmember Gearboss. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by, I'll give that one to McClellan. I'll get you next time, Councilwoman Dillon. All those in favor of adjourning signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. This meeting is adjourned. Thank you all.